Burgers, the Chart House, Monty's Steakhouse. I've been fired from some of the best restaurants. LA Sports Club had a restaurant. I got fired from there and I became a trainer. I was much better at that.
You became a trainer?
Yeah, I used to train all these old white dudes.
When were you a personal trainer?
My senior year in college.
Oh, and you kind of did that as well when you were starting out in banking. Is that right? You were offering training sessions to the MDs. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, I used to, every once in a while, and that was in New York, they had a great gym at Morgan Stanley, and I used to take guys down. Because if you're an investment banker, by the time you're 45 or 55, you're just a fucking hot mess. I mean, you just look like shit, and then they start freaking out, and they get diagnosed. Anyways, yeah, I used to, it's fun. I kind of enjoy it. I do it, one of the nicest parts of my day, I FaceTime my son, and I take him through a workout. It's a ton of fun. I really enjoy it.
Where are you? Are you in London? You back in London?
I'm in New York. I'm here for 2 more days, and then I go to this fancy conference in Aspen, which I'm excited about. And I'll be there 2 days, and I go home to London.
What have you been doing in New York?
Drinking. What have I been doing in New York? I got I'm going on. I'm going on the Today Show this afternoon.
Oh wow.
They called me and said, "Do you want to come on this morning with Meredith Vieira?" And I'm like, "Yeah, oh yeah, great." And they're like, "How long segment?" I'm like, 6 minutes. I'm like, "No, I'm not coming on for 6 minutes. You can ask me one question and then sell pharmaceutical ads, like to convince people to have restless legs or whatever." Yeah, I'm not hauling my ass up to Rockefeller. Anyway, so they called back. This comes out after I'm on. Okay, I can say this. And they said, we'll do a 30-minute piece or whatever. So I'm going up for a sit down with, gosh, I don't know her name. I'm sure some woman who was the most talented, attractive woman and then went to McGill College of Journalism or the one at Northwestern and is now hoping to be the next Barbara Walters and is finding out that all of her friends are making more money on Substack and podcasts. So I'm about to go find someone who's about to make a career change.
So when you say no to these things, how do you word that response?
It's nuanced, it's sophisticated. No. I'm very honest with them. I was supposed to be on with Gayle King on, what's that show? Is that the Today Show? No, CBS Sunday Morning? I don't know. What do they play at the rest homes?
I couldn't tell you. I don't watch these shows.
Well, that's because you're not 90 yet. Although, you little MSNBC man whore. Oh, my God. By the way, you were out. I got to give it to you. You were outstanding. Your last appearance. You were so good. I think you got more play on social. You were really strong.
Well, this is the interesting thing about this TV stuff. You go on TV, you think that's the performance, but it turns out it's the clip that goes on social media after. That's where all the action's really happening.
100%, which they don't monetize. Or at least I don't think that. Do they monetize? I don't know.
They post on YouTube, but I don't know how they're monetizing that. I guess they're just doing the AdSense. But that really is the future for these TV companies. The format is amazing for social media, actually, because there are these quick, very passionate hits. When you clip them into like 1 or 2 minute segments, that plays really well. So we are seeing sort of a resurgence of the cable model, except it's just not happening on TVs. It's happening on people's phones.
I see it as organ donation. I see it as they're this giant corpus that has lived a long life. It's taken a ton of energy and love and resources to keep this person alive. And then they're next to death and they donate their hearts and lungs to social, where it's like the social basically clips the only 90 seconds it was any good in the last hour on, name your broadcast network.
Why do you care? Can I just, in terms of this 6 minute versus 30-minute thing, is it the idea that they're not giving you, is it more of a respect thing? Like, I'm Scott Galloway, you should be giving me more of your time. Or is it that 6 minutes, you just don't want to have to put in the work for such a small amount, such a small performance?
It's total fucking game. I mean, Noam Chomsky and Sam Harris aren't doing fucking 6 minute hits. I mean, if Nicole Wallace or Anderson Cooper invite me on for like 20 or 30 minutes or 10 minutes or a longer hit, I'll do it. But I'm not going to go up there, have them ask one questions and have them thoughtfully look into my eyes and go, this is an issue we definitely want to keep on. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm like, oh, God. Get me to fucking Dunkin' Donuts. You're in the stage that I like to call, that I was in for 30 years, called being a total fucking media whore. You're saying yes to everything. And then you go on and you're awesome. And this is the thing, you're under the illusion that you're making progress. And to a certain extent, people seeing the brand, like, I got to believe a ton of your friends have emailed me like, oh my God, Ed, you're on MSNBC? The guy that we did rails of ketamine with in our junior year, and the guy who dressed up as a tiger for the Princeton Tigers game and who cheated off of me on the classics. The dude's on it. I can't imagine the group text ripping around PrincetonTigerDouchebag.com right now.
The first time I went on TV, I got a text from my college group chat, and it was a picture of me on the screen at the gym, and he just said, my friend just texted me, he's like, I'm just trying to work out, man.
He's like, dude, stop it. Stop it. No, you have been, I mean this sincerely, and I call out, go to TikTok or wherever you go and type in Ed Elson, MSNBC. You are really good. I mean, you're just okay on the pod, but you are really outstanding on MSNBC. You are really good. I think it's because, I'm not sure, I think you got the hots for Katie to Ari Melber. I think you really bring it when Ari or Katie are on. You're like, oh, yeah, I get it. I get it, Ed.
Yeah, you understand.
I get it. All right, enough of that. Enough of you dominating this conversation with banter. Ed, let's get to the headlines.
Let's get into, we have a great conversation coming up with speaking
Don't correct me, bitch, just because you're on MSNBC. I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're speaking with Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban, serial entrepreneur, investor, a total legend. Mark, so good to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Ed. Thanks, Scott.
So you've started many companies, serial entrepreneur. You've also started a lot of media companies. You have a lot of experience in media. This is a very interesting time for the media space. A ton of action in the past few weeks. Let's just start with the thing that everyone's talking about, and that is Jimmy Kimmel. Disney or Nexstar or ABC cancels Jimmy Kimmel, then they uncancel him. Just a very open-ended question. Your reactions to what's happened with Jimmy Kimmel thus far?
I mean, it's not the first time a major media company has put a star on hiatus for any number of reasons. You know, go back to Disney kicking out Gina Carano from a film. You know, and I know when I was on Shark Tank, the guys in charge of standards and practices were very clear about what we could say or not say. And when my name kept on coming up as a vice presidential candidate or a presidential candidate, they told me with no uncertain terms that I would have to leave the show if I took that path. So there's a lot of precedent for a lot of this stuff. So I wasn't surprised at all, to answer your question.
Just to interject here. This is different, Mark. This looks like there's a direct connection between the government, specifically the FCC chairman, threatening to revoke their license. This is more than just standards.
It is and it isn't, right? On one hand, we haven't heard an FCC commissioner talk like this ever. And so it's natural to connect it. On the flip side, there was just, a different set of pressures with identity politics that, put people under a microscope if they did or didn't make certain decisions.
Agreed.
And so where before it was coming, from social media and people with influence, now it's coming from the top down. So it's different, but it's the same. The players are different, but the impact's the same.
One is cultural pressure from progressives who, quite frankly, seem more concerned with virtue signaling than the material or psychological well-being of Americans. And what happened with Gina at The Mandalorian was unacceptable. They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to be stupid. This, to me, seems much more frightening.
Two different things, right? You're alluding to Jimmy Kimmel, right? And what ABC did, putting his show on hiatus. Now, if we want to talk about an FCC commissioner or anybody in a position of power in the administration making comments like that, yeah, it's terrifying. But I don't think there's, there may or may not be a direct connection between the two. It seems like there are, but I think they're two different issues because it's just a question of what kind of pressures would impact Disney or ABC to make a change in a brand name host versus what would lead an FCC commissioner or president or anybody for that matter to make the type of comments that they're making.
It sounds like you're less concerned about what happened with Jimmy Kimmel than I would say some other people, perhaps Scott and I are about this. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, again, two different
Yeah.
topics. Does it terrify me when the head of the FCC makes the comments he does? Yes. Right. Does it surprise me that a network would virtue signal one way or the other, depending on who they think has the leverage or not? No.
Yeah, there's some other interesting things that we're seeing going on in media right now, and that is the TikTok deal. That it appears that Trump is really quarterbacking. It will likely go into the hands of Oracle and perhaps the Ellison family. And more recently, he's been talking about how the Murdoch family could get involved in this deal. I also wanted to just get your reactions to what's happening with TikTok, putting that algorithm in the hands of these families.
Well, there's two parts to it. One, it's scary because there was no open auction. There was only a discussion about, someone should be interested in buying TikTok and let's see what happens. But then the second part is when you bring in new cooks, the soup might just get destroyed. And so there's no assumption. You can't make an assumption that its success will continue because if they do take over the algorithm, that's part of it. But remember when we were looking at TikTok closing, they came out with a new product called Red, and they came out with other products that were out there, and a material number of people just switched. What would be insane to see is if TikTok came out with their own Red again and competed in the United States with the US version of TikTok. But I guess my point is there's no assurances that this new version of TikTok with Larry Ellison, his son David, the Murdochs, whoever it may be, are, that they will be successful. I mean, kids are very persnickety, and those algorithms, if they take control, what is it about the TikTok algorithm that differentiated it from the meta algorithms for Facebook? They both have their own goals, and we don't yet know how those goals will influence the uptake if we have new TikTok management, or how they'll even influence what Meta and others will do. Meta and it doing with Instagram and Facebook. So there's a lot of interconnected pieces there.
Are you concerned at all about? I mean, you mentioned there that it wasn't really an open auction. Are you concerned about the extent to which the president is really setting up these deals? Is this something that we've seen before? Is there precedent for this? Or is this new? The idea that the president would figure out a way to get the seller to sell and then choose the buyers?
Well, it's not new under Trump, for sure, right? We've seen it with MP. We've seen it with Intel. We've seen it in his efforts with others. He's a deal maker. He wants to be the figurehead for every and any deal. Now, what are the consequences of that happening? That's to be determined, because interjecting himself doesn't mean it's going to work. We saw Intel when they took the 10%, then you saw NVIDIA take another 5%. It doesn't change Intel's business. Intel still has the same challenges. The fact that he's involved, do I like it? No. Do I think it's smart? No. Do I think it optimizes the opportunities for the companies involved? No. But at the same time, am I surprised? No.
Just speaking more broadly about the media ecosystem, it feels like it's concentrating. It feels like obviously certain channels and platforms are losing relevance, some are gaining relevance. Do you have any general thoughts about the media ecosystem and if and where, if you were going to invest in media, where you would invest, where you would go long and where you would go short, so to speak?
There's no chance I'd invest in the media ecosystem at all, anywhere.
Yeah, just stay away from it.
Yeah, it's brutal. Because it's hits driven, and creating a hit is hard no matter what the platform is, and going viral is hard no matter what the platform is. If you look at what Mr. Beast does, I think he's figured it out the best. He spends a lot of time reverse engineering the algorithms, because that's what it all comes down to. What makes the media ecosystem so difficult is we all spend so much time on social media, and we all have our own unique feed. Ed's feed on whichever platform is different than Scott's, different than Mark's. And so that customization that really allows people to really go down all kinds of rabbit holes, is unique. You can't do that on traditional television, whether it's broadcast or cable. You can't do that necessarily with YouTube, even though they do use algorithms and they feed you a lot of stuff with shorts, and they're truly the largest distributor, but there's just so much, right? You can't get to all. Whereas short form content, they can make you think anything they want you to think. And that is the underlying challenge that this country has, that whoever controls the algorithm controls your thoughts.
Well, do you think along those lines, I promised myself during this entire segment I was not going to ask you if you're running for president. So I'll do something different. I'll say, let's cosplay president.
Okay.
If it was a President Cuban, and to your point, the algorithms decide what we see. And sometimes those algorithms don't have, most of the time, all of the time, those algorithms don't have our best interests at heart. They have shareholders' best interests at heart. And sometimes incendiary, rage-filled content gets elevated beyond its organic reach. So as a President Cuban, what would be your approach, if any, to regulating big tech and algorithmically elevated content?
So one, I'd say you have to be 16 or more to use social media. If you go on X, you can be 13 years old and go on X, and there's tons of porn. There's no shortage of porn at all. And it's just amazing to me that, people outside the Republican Party don't bring that up as a cause of action, because you can't be so strict on, I want to protect schools, I want to protect kids, et cetera, and not recognize that this is, the worse than the Playboys I grew up with underneath the bed, underneath my dad's bed that I used to grab, right? It just goes to no end. So that's part one. Part two is, and I actually said this to TikTok a couple years ago when they brought me in to just have a discussion. I think if you are going to let kids under 18 on, you have to have an HTML file that shows a link to all of the videos that they've watched, so that parents can get a feel for what's going on with their children. I mean, literally, as a parent, my son, who's just turned 16, gets so mad at me because I'll look at what he's watching on Instagram and TikTok and whatever it may be, because it tells me who he is. That algorithm knows more about him than I do. And so that would be part two, having, a way to communicate with parents. But beyond that, I wouldn't do anything, because that would make me a hypocrite, saying, when Trump or the FCC chairman tries to insert themselves into business, that wouldn't be the way to work. But I would also encourage businesses at that point in time to flood the zone, right? Whatever the message, let's just say as a president, I was trying to get a particular message, unity among the American people. I want people to come together. I would use AI to create nonstop billions of 30-second videos that communicate that message, to get to the point where people are so sick and tired of seeing it all, they stop using those platforms.
So just along those lines, not intervening, I mean, I like the idea of capitalism just being competition that's refereed. But are you comfortable with the concept of Larry Ellison having a lot of influence over CBS, TikTok, potentially Warner Brothers, CNN? Do you think there's a place for intervention around antitrust and ensuring these media ecosystems don't get too concentrated?
No. And just like when George Soros bought all the Odyssey stations, and there were 200 of them, and there was a big to-do about how he's going to change them over, the American people will speak with their attention. And I don't think somebody putting in cash to effectively dying industries is something the government should get involved with. Most of those are end-of-life type situations. And there's still a lot of uncertainty. And I think, with AI, we still haven't seen the next generation of media developed yet.
Do you think Hollywood is dead? You talked about Mr. Beast there, and I totally agree. He's absolutely nailed it. He's now getting more viewing time than the top series on Netflix. Is this the end of Hollywood?
No, because AI, again, I keep on going back to it, AI makes creative people more creative and more efficient. So whereas before, with Shark Tank, we would shoot in June and nothing would appear to go on TV until September at the earliest. And it just took time for the editors, the storytellers to put together stories. With AI, you can iterate so quickly so that somebody who's very skilled in storytelling, in graphics, it doesn't replace them. It amplifies their skill set so you can do more quicker. And so I think you'll see more great content created by great content creators and more junk, a lot more junk, but the great content creators, like they always have, will stand out. And those will, I'm not saying movies will come back. They won't, because people aren't leaving the house.
When it comes to your investment strategy, how are you incorporating AI into your investment strategy? What do you think the future of AI is really going to look like?
Well, there's two types of companies, those who are great at AI and those who used to be in business. And so you've got to incorporate it into everything you do. Like with Cost Plus Drugs, we have a manufacturing plant in Dallas, Texas, that's cheaper than what they can manufacture in India and China, because it's all robotically and AI driven. It doesn't take many people, but more importantly, we can turn from one drug to the next in hours. And so the same type of concept applies to all businesses. Now, what's interesting, I know, Scott, you've talked a lot about this in terms of jobs and kids coming out of school. I think the big adjustment is that like my daughter goes to Vanderbilt and she's getting ready to graduate and they all want to go work for a big company. And I keep on telling her that, no, what's changing is big companies have the money and resources to train and implement AI and become more and more efficient. Small to medium-sized companies don't. They need AI natives, not necessarily just to be prompters. That's not going to get you there, but to understand how agentic AI works, to understand how to integrate, to understand how to look at processes from the consumer's perspective and reinvent how you do things. And then the great unknown beyond that, which will open up more doors for kids coming out over the next few years, is robotics. Because right now, everything we know about AI is pretty much, it's multimodal, where you have pictures and text, but it doesn't really incorporate video at all. It's not training on video to understand what's happening in the world. You can't tell it. You have to tell it very discreetly, if somebody gets hit by this, it rolls, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas with robotics, they've got to capture video. I think this is where Elon is smart and ahead of the curve, and where robotics companies might supersede what we're seeing with the big AI companies. But think of it this way. Put aside humanoid robots. I don't think that's the future. But being able to tell a robot, clean the house, without giving discrete instructions, is what's going to happen. Right? It's going to know, what socks go together. It's going to know how long to wash. It's going to know to look under the bed for dust for the kids. It's going to have to understand these things inherently because it's been trained on those things. Being trained on video and understanding the rules of physics without having to be told and having some common sense and context because you're seeing it all reduces latency, makes it smarter. And imagine that, that approach relative to a chat GPT. Which are you going to use? Right? It's great to get text-based information back and pictures-based, right? And allow it to create fun videos and all that. But in terms of helping your business or changing your life, I think we'll take it to the point where homes will be redesigned, to become more efficient, because now it's designed for people to do all the tasks. But if your washing machine is designed to be run by, a robot that looks more like a spider or whatever they come up with because it's been optimized to fit, the game has changed, and we can talk differently about building homes and connecting homes, all kinds of stuff. Now, parallel to that, we've got the ultimate war between all the AI companies. You've got Meta, you've got Google, you've got ChatGPT, you've got xAI with Grok, you've got Perplexity, you've got Claude and Anthropic. All of them want to be the winner. Not all of them will be the primary destination when people download their first AI app. And so how deep will the ability to be financially successful and have that network effect, will it go? Will it just be one? Will it be 2, 3, 4, 5? We don't know. But as we start to find out that could be the delineator in the stock market with the Mag 7, right? Will they acquire each other? Will they go down swinging? Will they be the next IBMs from the 60s to the 2010s? It's not preordained the way we see it today. That's the way I believe. And you just look at these companies spending tens of billions of dollars a year borrowing money beyond their cash flow because they believe it's a zero-sum game, kissing the ass of the administration because they have to. It's their fiduciary responsibility. So that's generally how I see everything. I think it reminds me of the early days of streaming. When we first started streaming, you had to download a TCP/IP client. You had to have an ISP subscription. You had to get, a piece of software. And then it all changed, and people don't even think twice about streaming. It's just there. We'll get into it, and it becomes comprehensive. It went from audio to video to 3D to AR, whatever. We'll see that type of generational change with AI as well.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up the comparison to streaming. I think a lot of people are thinking of the comparison really just to the dot-com boom at large. And a lot of the dynamics you described there do feel at least similar. The idea that we all know that something's going to happen. You got Zuckerberg saying, we might piss away hundreds of billions of dollars, but ultimately superintelligence, it's too big of a fish to just not really go for it. So we're going to go for it anyway. So yeah, but it also portends, if we saw what happened when the dot-com bubble imploded, and a lot of people did get massively burned.
Yeah, we don't know who AOL is. We don't know who Yahoo is, to create analogies. But we know a couple of these big AI companies are either or.
Yes. And so how do you as an investor deal with that? I mean, we're seeing these massive valuations, OpenAI, Anthropic, everyone's trying to get in on these companies. And yet there's this little thing in the back of everyone's mind, which is maybe it's only going to be one or two winners in this whole game. And yet we're still willing to invest tens, in some cases, hundreds of billions of dollars into these companies.
I still think you have to, right? You don't know who the winner's going to be. ChatGPT's in the lead, but Gemini's catching up with Nano Banano. It just came out of left field, right? And now all of a sudden it's just changed the dynamics of users using AI products. And so I still think you got to go all in. I don't think there's any issue there. And part of the issue is that there's just fewer places to put your money. Particularly in the public markets. When we took broadcast.com public in 1998, there were 8,500 public companies plus all the pink sheets and everything else. Now there's, 5,000 maybe, and it's easier to deal with private equity than it is to go public. But to me, that's unfortunate because it doesn't create the liquidity for your employees or early investors. I mean, you can with early investors, but it doesn't, I always looked at going public as a way to reward our employees. And I think going back to if I was the president again, I would create tax incentives for companies that rewarded all of their employees with a pari passu type ratio of stock rewards, whether it's warrants, restricted stock, absolute stock, whatever it may be, to income. So if the CEO gets $100,000 worth of stock and makes $1 million, that's 10%. The person working the front desk at the office who makes $40,000 gets 10%, $4,000. Because I think that's a path to income equality, because you have to increase people's asset base in order for them to have assets that appreciate and keep up. Because if you don't have assets that appreciate, you can't ever keep up. So it's kind of jumping around again, but I think AI is still where you invest. I think part of the reason is there's so much money coming in and there's no place else to put it. You don't see the mid caps, you don't see the Russell, you don't see them breaking out at the same, because between tariffs and the investment in AI. But at some point, we'll figure out who the America Online is. We'll figure out who the Yahoo is. And then, bam, it all changes. I just don't know when that point is.
I'm really glad you bring up this idea of the fact that we are seeing so many fewer public companies today than we were 20, 30 years ago. This has been a big theme on our show. This idea that AI is happening, and yet all of the action is happening in the private markets. The only place you can really invest, as you say, is you've got NVIDIA. You can invest in Google, and we believe that Google's pretty undervalued right now, Oracle. But aside from a handful of big tech companies, which everyone already knew about, all of the consumer AI investments are still sort of siphoned off from the public. It's been a big concern of ours. I'm wondering if it's a concern of yours, the idea that regular people can't get in on this stuff.
I've been saying it for 2 decades that there aren't enough public companies. Whatever the latest technology is, people, employees and investors should be able to participate. I used to jump all over Gary Gensler because he made it so hard to go public. It should be easy to go public. Now, there should be strict reporting and auditing standards to make sure the numbers are real. But beyond that, it needs to be easier than it is now. And look, you give President Trump credit to do a 6-month instead of 3-month reporting cycle. That's fine. It doesn't change the economics of the business, but it makes it a little bit easier because, that week or two before you report earnings is always just a stressful time when you have to write and rewrite the same nonsense over and over again.
Let me ask you this, though, because you said, and I think I agree with you, but I just wanted the straw man here, the steel man. I went and saw the Fantastic Four, 3,400 people working on the film, and I think sooner rather than later, it's going to take 300. And I don't think we need 10 superhero films. I don't think people are begging for more content right now. And when you reference Kimmel, the problem with Kimmel, the bigger issue, other than censorship, is that it's 160 people to produce that show. It's just too damn expensive. It's not that he's not talented. It's not that he doesn't have an audience. It's just the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It's too goddamn expensive. And it strikes me that there's just certain industries that are going to see a fairly severe reduction in employment in the short and the medium term.
Oh, for sure. That always creative destruction. I mean, they don't make records in Terre Haute, Indiana anymore. RCA is gone, right? Or there may be some semblance of it left. So there will be destruction at various points. But I think as an entrepreneur, oh my God, there's going to be people creating businesses and having access to, a large language model, Perplex, whatever. As long as you understand when it starts hallucinating, when you start getting 8, 10, layers deep, right? You have every business professor in the history of business professors at your disposal to put together your business plan, to review, to use Gemini research. That, like when I started my companies when I was 16 and 18, and I had to go sit in the library and read books to try to figure out all this stuff, now it's like that. And just, it'll democratize business education. It'll democratize education in general. It's like when Andrew Carnegie built libraries around the country to try to democratize education. This is that to the millionth level. There's nothing a kid can't learn right now. And when you tell me that there's a tool that allows any child to learn anything they want within the constraints of self-harm and all that kind of stuff, right? But allowing a child to learn anything they want, nothing makes me more excited. Because if you believe that, the curiosity of a child can lead to, something we haven't even imagined yet. Like when I go talk to kids at school, one of the things I always do inevitably, when I say kids, I mean anywhere from 10 to 18. I point at the screen on the wall. I said, one day that didn't exist and someone came up with the idea. That chair you're sitting on, one day a chair looking like that didn't exist and someone came up with the idea. Everything you're wearing, everything you've seen that's not natural, someone came up with that idea. Now with AI and the access to everybody, literally, then that kid with that idea can get direction in exactly what to do.
One thing that's been a concern for young people, though, is, I mean, this creative destruction, which is absolutely true. And what we always see with technology is it comes in, it tears up a bunch of jobs, and then some new jobs show up. But I think one of the big questions is, what do you do in the interim? And what we have found, and we've been discussing this study that came out recently, which found that there's been a reduction in job openings that are related to AI of 13%, specifically for young people. So AI is kind of taking your job, but more specifically, it's taking young people's jobs. And I think one of the big questions that we've been trying to get to the bottom to is, as a young person, you mentioned your daughter there at Vanderbilt, as a young person, how do you not get replaced by AI? If AI is so capable at all of these things, what are the kinds of skills that you double down on?
Well, in order for AI to replace you, somebody has to know how to implement AI in order to replace you, right? And that happens in big businesses, like I alluded to earlier. But there are only 20,000 businesses in this country with more than 500 employees. That's it. And there are millions and millions of businesses that create 62% of new jobs every year. The challenge is you've got to just look in different places, because the big company already is going to have somebody, because they're under the pressure to get all their numbers down to do it. The small to medium-sized companies are under far more pressure to compete with the bigger companies. And we saw that to a certain extent, with HTML and the internet in the mid and late 90s, and kids were considered geniuses if they could do web pages. But I'm not talking about prompting, right? Small companies don't have the resources or the knowledge or the ability to just say, okay, this process, we're going to just turn it into an agent. At Cost Plus Drugs, we have one person that's young, in her 20s. All she does is look at processes that are manual right now, just go through the list and try to automate them, and then track them and manage them. That is the job that every small to medium-sized company needs, but may not know that they need it because the CEO may not be literate enough. And a kid coming in there saying, I just spent the last 2 years living and breathing and cheating with ChatGPT and Perplexity to get through my classes, and I did an agent that went out, da-da-da. As long as you can do agents or learn agents, and if you have a programming background at all, you're good. You're going to be able to get a job. It's just, the tipping point really is when those small companies realize they're falling behind because they're not able to implement AI to get the cost savings that their bigger competitors are. Then they'll have no choice but to hire those kids.
If I were to sort of summarize your approach to this, I mean, it's really, you got to lean into AI. You got to use as many agents that are at your disposal, and you got to learn how to use it. But if I were to sort of summarize your philosophy, it seems as though one of your biggest priorities in business, and I think this has been true across your career, is you need to be curious and willing to adopt technology. It sounds like that is the real alpha that you see in your career. Whenever a technology comes along, you cannot write it off. You cannot think that it's too confusing. You have to be willing to go through the hard work of understanding, how do I actually use this thing, and how do I figure out a way to be more productive?
It's actually a little bit backwards. You look at the industry and you look at the processes and you look at the interrelations and you say, what's right, what's optimal, and what's a mess? Like in healthcare, how can we start costplusdrugs.com and literally change the pharmacy industry so that the $100 billion plus competitors are telling their customers they're going to emulate what we do, and they haven't been able to do it because of their cost structure? Because I went in there and I looked at the processes and realized just how opaque they are, and was able to simplify it to something as simple as all we have to do is be transparent, because nobody trusts anything. If you look at what's happening now with healthcare on the healthcare side, right? It is so back-ass half-words. I'll give you a simple example. You've got, and we'll go back to politics if Mark Cuban was president, right? You've got the Democrats talking about the continuing resolution to keep the government open. And they're saying one of the things that we want is to have the premium subsidies for the ACA continued. Now, I'll take a little step to the side here. What type of company is the most hated company in all of America?
Health insurance?
Yep. Now, when you create those, when you have those premium subsidies that you're trying to keep alive, right? Who do 100% of those premium subsidies, tens of billions of dollars or more for the 12.5 million people receiving subsidies on the ACA? Who are those taxpayer checks written directly to?
Health insurance.
Yes. Now, why do health insurance companies love it and everybody hates them? Because you have premiums, but you can't get access and benefit of your insurance until you've paid your deductible and you're out of pocket. And the deductibles are going up. And so, and we can take a little side trip again. You want to talk about the economy, right? Everybody's paying more and more premiums, but even worse, and what everybody's missing is the deductibles and out-of-pockets are going up even faster. And if you can't afford to pay your deductible, you can't afford to get health care. So President Cuban would say, look, we already have, we guarantee mortgages. We in some states, they'll even put the down payment down for you for $25,000 worth. We'll guarantee student loans. We'll guarantee SBA loans. Maybe not 100%, but a big chunk of them. But if you're about to die, right, you can go into an ER to try to get stabilized. But anything else, if you can't afford your deductible, you're shit out of luck. Why don't we guarantee the deductibles, and instead of sending that those premium subsidies to the insurance companies, use them to not subsidize, but guarantee the amount of money that it would take to go and get the care you need so that your health insurance kicks in. Because the other thing that happens as part of this, think of it, you're a hospital and God forbid somebody gets hurt and they go to the hospital and they look up your insurance from your insurance card and you have an ACA Silver plan, you have a family of 5 and your deductible is $5,000 and you don't have $400. 40% of people in this country, now a chunk are on Medicaid, but 40% of these people don't have $400. Right. So there's a really good probability that people going in to need care can't afford their deductible. So you know what the hospitals do? The hospitals work with companies or they do it themselves. They loan money to these people just so they can get access to the insurance company's premiums, which in turn turns those providers, the hospitals, et cetera, into subprime lenders. And they collect maybe 50%. And they're the ones that are creating all the bills that everybody's talking about, the healthcare bills that caused bankruptcy or did cause bankruptcy, right? Not because they want to, but they were put in this position because of the way we allow health insurance to work. And those people, if you can't afford your deductible, do you think you're going to be willing to take a chance on a house or moving, right? Or changing jobs? Hell no. And so all these things, we have to start understanding the real pain points that every single American that's not wealthy has. And that starts with your healthcare deductible, because there is nothing more important to any individual or their family than if something horrific happens, or even little things. You know, if your deductible is higher than what you have access in credit and cash, and you can't make up the gap to be able to use your insurance,
is that we see, as the owner of the Mavericks, you get to know very personally and intimately these young men. And I think just by their physical stature and their excellence, we forget that a lot of these men are really more boys. They're so young. And one, I'd just be curious to get your thoughts on the struggles that young men face in America and what some potential solutions and approaches to it, and how your views as a father, having both daughters and sons, and being around so many young men has informed your view on this.
First, on the players, it's actually a lot easier than it used to be 10 years ago because of NIL. Back in the day, they'd never opened up a credit card account or a checking account.
What's NIL, Mark?
That's the money that kids in college can be paid for playing sports.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So now they understand how economics work, right? And they have agents, and that's been great for athletes. For my 16-year-old son, his friends, it's terrifying. because it's hard for 16-year-olds and parents to connect, male or female for that matter, boys or girls, because when I want to talk to him about Andrew Tate, he's like, shut up, Dad, so I'll just go on a little soliloquy and say, you're going to listen to this, and here's what's important to me, and here's what's not, and if you have questions. But it is terrifying. It really, really is, because the influence is there, and there's no independence whatsoever. It's either far left or far right. And I think there's a lot more far right winning right now than we'd like to see. Like Nick Fuentes, he has a following that goes younger and younger. And that's terrifying.
Any thoughts or ideas regarding potential solutions?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said. This is all algorithmically driven, and so if you didn't allow kids, or maybe you just start with not allowing them to have their phones at school as a starting point, which I think is a big plus, but you can't let kids under 18 or under 16 at least get on social media. You just cannot, unless you make sure that the algorithms are fully published and available all day, every day, for every change, or there's a link for parents to see everything that they've watched. So you know what to have a conversation about, because as I said before, those algorithms know our kids better than we do. And the easiest way for me to know what my son in particular is into is by watching him scroll through his phones. As long as it's basketball, fantasy football, hot girl, basketball. I'm okay. But when I, every now and then I'll see, not an Andrew Tate, but somebody, that's selling, the macho approach, right? And that scares me.
You've built so many different businesses. You've had successes in just so many different areas. I mean, you've built businesses, internet businesses. You've had success in entertainment. You've been a TV personality. You've owned an NBA team that went on to win a championship. Now you're in the healthcare business. I feel like, a lot of the big thing that we're trying to do on this show is we're talking about markets, but we're also just trying to figure out, how do we get rich and how do we become successful? And what is that all about? I would be interested to know, just given the diversity of success that you've had, what really drives you? Like, you're building this healthcare company right now. What is driving Mark Cuban, and what are you trying to do? What kind of legacy are you trying to leave?
To me, business is the ultimate sport. Period, end of story. And I may not be able to play basketball as well as I used to, but I want to compete still. And there's no better way to compete than in business, because it's just a matter of my taking the time to learn what I need to learn. And Steve Jobs said it best. He said, everything's a remix. And so I start with a base of technological information. So when AI comes along, I'm read books about machine learning. Then I get into, training models and all that kind of stuff, but I'm willing to put in the time. And what I tell kids when they ask me, how do you get there, right? You find something you love to do, and then you just commit the time to be great at it. And I'm not, if you happen to be a special athlete and playing tennis, basketball, whatever, great, do what you do. But in business, most people don't take the time. And especially now with AI, you can ask AI any question on the planet. There's nothing you can't ask. And so I do it all the time. Like, I was giving a speech, and this I won't blow my cover here, but they right before the speech, they asked me to cover a topic that I was going to be asked about. I didn't know shit about it, right? So I just pulled out Perplexity and ChatGPT, so I had two different answers to compare, and said, this is what I'm going to be asked to talk about. What are the 10 top things that I should mention? And they all made perfect sense to me. So I went in and they thought I was smart,
That's what I should do.
Every kid, the hardest part about AI is not being embarrassed about asking the questions you normally would only ask a human. That's the hardest part about AI. And so as it pertains, again, there is no better time. I've said this forever, but there's no better time to be an entrepreneur than now. I mean, I remember buying books, how to build a business plan, or your business plan for this. I opened up a bar in college, your business plan for your bar, and it has all the fill in the blank stuff, right? Now, there's no industry that I can't ask about. Like, there was a product today that I had Gemini Research do deep research for me, and it took them 8 minutes. And I knew everything that I would have learned if I would have gone and done all the searching online, and I checked the sources and confirmed and all that. But anybody, if they're curious enough and they're excited enough and they want to learn, can dig in and learn. And if you have the capacity just to start building a base of knowledge, then for all businesses, right, you start with that base, and then you might fail at a business, but you learn. Then you go to the next one and you learn, and go to the next one. And I say it all the time to these kids, you only have to be right one time. Doesn't matter how many times you fail. You don't know about my powdered milk company. You don't know about my bar. You don't know about all these businesses that failed. But I just kept on compounding my knowledge and kept on always learning, always reading, and just always being curious, always being competitive. That's what it takes. And how you define success may be different than me, but however you define it, you can get there.
That moment where you're asked to speak on this topic, and you have two options there. Either you say, I'm actually not that knowledgeable about that topic, but I'm happy to talk about these topics here. I can do that. Or you say, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to figure out what this is, and I'm going to talk about it anyway, and I'm going to make sure that I say something that I really believe and that I think is correct. Those are two choices. And I'm wondering, one of them has a sense of caution. The other has a sense of risk, danger, and bravery. Has that always existed in you, this desire to go above and beyond, to push yourself, no matter what the situation is? Or is this something that you've trained over the years?
I mean, it's all imposter syndrome. Yeah. Right? And I just don't want to get busted. And I'm not afraid to say I don't know. Even like that speech I alluded to, they really zigged off into other areas I knew. So this is just a starting point, but I don't have a problem. And I'll going back to AI. The one thing that humans do that AI can't do, they say, I don't know. And an AI model, the programmers behind it will set thresholds above which they think the probability that they're right, and they'll give the answer. But they have no context at all. Humans, inherently, we understand what's going on around us. And if there's something we don't know, we have the capability. We might not do it, right? And maybe that gets you elected president, but most of us are able to say, I don't know. And that's always going to make us different than technology. I mean, that's the difference, right? Right there.
You mentioned this idea of achieving success, and everyone has a different version of success, and yours might be different from others. What is your version of success? What does success mean to you at this point? You've kind of conquered the money game. Everyone wants you to run for some form of elected office. People keep on doing this, and you keep on saying, no, I'm not going to do it. But that's a area of life that you could go on to conquer. What does success look like for you at this point?
Just waking up every day excited. I was happy when I was broke. When I was sleeping on the floor with 5 roommates in a 3-bedroom apartment, I was enjoying my life. It was stressful in a lot of different ways, getting the credit cards cut up, the phone ringing all the time, and his bill collectors, et cetera, et cetera. But I knew I was going to find a way, maybe not financially, but I was going to find a way to take care of myself and enjoy myself. And it's the same way now, but that's one of the reasons I sold the Mavs. That's one of the reasons I got off of Shark Tank, because that joy for me comes from my kids and comes from my family. And Shark Tank was always in June and September, which is my wife's birthday, and effectively all but one of my kids. One of my kids is in August, and the other 2 are in September. My anniversary's in September, and I was always missing it, and then the season started, and so I was gone a lot, and I was like, no, of all the things I want to say on my deathbed, being president, being rich, being called dad, yeah.
Mark Cuban is a serial entrepreneur and investor. He's founded several companies, including MicroSolutions, Broadcast.com, and most recently, Cost Plus Drugs, a company focused on reforming U.S. drug pricing. He bought the NBA's Dallas Mavericks in 2000, led them to a championship in 2011, sold majority control in 2023. His ventures in media include HDNet, Magnolia Pictures, 2929 Productions, and Shark Tank. He lives in Dallas with his wife and 3 children. Mark, this was excellent. So good to have you on the show, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Thanks, Scott. It was always a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Scott, your thoughts?
I like Mark. He's very likable. I don't know many people who don't like him, and I like the fact that he tries to be centrist. I like the fact that he's very much a capitalist, that he tries to give both sides sort of equal airtime. I think it's refreshing to have someone who really is sort of, I'd call him sort of center right. I like what he's doing with Cost Plus. He's always entertaining. I think he's definitely, personally, I think he's leaving the door open to run for presidency, because I'm just not entirely sure why he would come on shows like this unless, I mean, there's just not a lot of people looking to buy, Zolapram on Cost Plus who listen to this show.
Never know.
You never know. I do think he's probably thinking that he wants to leave the door open around president. But in general, I think he's a good role model for young men. I think he's smart, thoughtful. I think he'd actually be a really interesting voice. I'm not sure I want him to be president, but I'd like him to run. I think he'd add a lot of really interesting dialogue, and also always make sure that the race was keeping their eye on capitalism, if you will. Your thoughts, Ed?
I was very interested to hear his thoughts on those last few questions on, especially around imposter syndrome, this idea that, he really has a love of the game's being business. He's never down to not be playing in the game. Whether that's in sports or in media or in entertainment or in technology or in healthcare. I mean, he just has this absolute love of business and this love of competing. And I feel like that's a big part of why he's been so successful, is that he basically doesn't seem to say no. And I just wanted to get your reactions to that philosophy. What do you make of that?
My sense of Mark, and I don't know him well, but I know him a little bit, is that he's good at life. He's just really, he also got really fucking lucky. I mean, broadcast.com got bought for $6 billion. Do you use broadcast.com?
I don't.
I mean, it was internet radio, I think, and he sold it for $6 billion. So back in the kind of go-go days of 98 or 99. So, but then again, he kept trying until he got lucky. So I don't begrudge his billions.
Let me ask you this then. Do you have the same approach? I mean, when he was describing his approach, I feel like you have a similar philosophy, which is you're always going to be in the game. You're going to be competing, whether that's in e-commerce or podcasting or investing. I feel like that's a big part of your philosophy too, no?
This for me is the salad days, because when I was your age, I was working just so hard and doing so many things I didn't want to do to try and establish an economic base, and working harder than I wanted, and playing golf with people I didn't want to play golf with, and managing crazy young people I didn't want to manage. And now, that I've gotten some economic security, I can do exactly what I want and exactly what I want. And I think it's similar to Marcus, to do fun stuff where you're in the game, where you're trying to build shit, trying to make money. And if you don't like it, you can leave. And, if he was still trying to make money in awareness, he wouldn't have left Shark Tank. But now the biggest lecture in the world is no. And one of my role models, Barry Rosenstein, he said there are 3 buckets in life. There's things you have to do, there's things you want to do, and there's things you should do. If your biggest investor's in town, you have to do it. There's things you want to do. Yeah, you want to take your son to see, Arsenal play Wolves or whatever. And then there's things you should do. And that is, you think, well, Scott's got this event. I don't really want to go, but I should go because Scott's my boss. Or my friend's sister is having her bat mitzvah. The last fucking thing I want to do, but I should do it. There's a networking event. I'm exhausted, but I should go in case I, meet good people. The key to getting to a point of economic security and a certain level of self-actualization is you can eliminate the should bucket. And that's the luxury. I get the sense Mark is doing a few things he has to do, but mostly doing things he wants to do. But you want to stay in the game. You want to stay mentally active. It's fun to make money. You want to be relevant. A lot of it's ego-driven. I think, quite frankly, what I probably share with Mark, I think we both have pretty healthy egos. And you want to be relevant and in the game and get the affirmation of others. But also, as you get older, if you have a certain amount of economic security, you do get some perspective, and you're like, you start recognizing the finite nature of life. And that is, you're like, okay, I got to start spending more time with people that I care about and they care about me, especially your kids, because your kids are leaving. So you absolutely do change your perspective and start, there's nothing like impending death that creates perspective. And it's getting increasingly impending when you're 60 and 67, which I am and which Mark Cuban is. It just changes your view on things because when you're your age, you can't imagine it ending. So you don't think that way. And that's healthy because you should be taking risks and doing things. But in terms of imposter syndrome, what I would suggest
is the author of the Unhedged newsletter and co-host of the Unhedged podcast. You all know him. He's a regular at this point. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be back.
A lot we want to get into here. I think I would love to start with your reactions to last week's taco. It feels like years ago because so much has happened in the past several days. Not really markets news, but we can just set that aside for now. Let's just focus on the taco. We want to get your reaction because, as I remind everyone, you invented the term taco. We're now seeing another taco, this time with Greenland. He decided to pull those Europe tariffs after, I don't know if nuclear is the right word, but people were pretty riled up about what was happening with Greenland. What do you make of last week's taco? What does it tell us going forward?
Well, the first thing I would note is that the markets didn't move very much on this crazy plan of Trump's, this crazy saber rattling on Greenland. So, the S&P was down a couple of percent. The dollar was 1% weaker, or maybe a little more. So he didn't seem like he was scared off by markets exactly. So, and that's kind of a theme, that the markets reaction function to crazy Trump stuff does seem to be getting blunted over time. But maybe, it's the politics. He just realized at some point that he was holding a losing hand against Europe, and he folded. I mean, I think, and maybe we ought to be glad. This is a guy who cuts his losses when he realizes the other team isn't going to just shrivel.
He also threatened these tariffs on Canada if they go ahead with this China deal. My instinct here is we'll probably see a taco again. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out if there's any rubric or formula that you can follow as an investor or even as just a market observer when Trump comes out and makes these statements about tariffs. Like, do you just not believe them, or are there certain situations where you do believe them?
I think in this case with the Canada tariffs, you can be pretty confident not believing them that they're going to end up anywhere near 100%. Trump has shown no appetite for outright trade embargoes, which is what a 100% tariff amounts to. If we cut off all trade with Canada, there would be howls of pain in the U.S. economy as well as the Canadian economy. And it would just be more than the president could take. So I would 100% bet on a taco in this case. There's just no way. It's not practicable. It was just an expression of rage, I think, not a policy proposal.
I've had a thought recently after last week's taco. I wonder if investors would be better off never, ever listening to anything that he says. I would love to put that question forward to you. Like, there's an argument to be made that if you just turn it off, you just press the mute button, you might perhaps make better investment decisions, or at the very least, just don't really take anything that he says that seriously. I mean, this is a delicate game to play because he's the president and, he does have a lot of power. But I do wonder if that would be the case. I guess I wonder what you make of it.
I think you'd have to be careful to distinguish the cases where it's straight out of the Truth Social account and the cases where there's more voices echoing the policy, right? So, because of course, there have been highly market relevant Trump policies, the tax cuts, whatever. But I wonder if just pretending he didn't have a Truth Social account, limiting your intake that way, I think that might work pretty well. But again, there's another question, which is how much does this guy change over time? I think I wonder if as his term wears on, second term, lame duck president, 79 going on 80, whatever, you have to take seriously the possibility that his risk appetite, his just sheer bloody mindedness is becoming more extreme over time.
Right.
And we saw that in the case of Venezuela, I mean, so I don't know, turn it off, but clearly a more cautious attitude is warranted. Yeah, I mean, a more,
Yes.
I should say, not the opposite of cautious, a more skeptical attitude
Skeptical. Yes.
is warranted here.
Yes, there should be some filter between what is a Truth Social post and what is a policy proposal. The line is very blurry. It's not totally clear, but I think you're right. I think there probably is a line. And if someone could figure out exactly what that line is, maybe it's when Scott Bessent says something. I doubt it. Maybe when a plurality of officials get together and agree that this is the plan. Again, I'm not sure about that either, but it does seem very relevant if we're trying to parse out what is taco and what isn't. I guess taco versus FAFO, as you've pointed out before. I do want to get your reactions to what's happening with the price of gold right now. Gold has now surpassed $5,000. It's up more than 50% over the past 6 months. It is coinciding with murmurs of a sell America trade coming back. Perhaps those are related, perhaps they aren't. But yeah, I'd like to get your views. I mean, gold has had this unbelievable year. They keep on setting these price targets, or at least I keep on seeing these price targets that seem absurd. And then it just keeps on hitting them. What do you make of what's happened with gold over the past few weeks and the past few months?
First of all, I should note for the benefit of your listeners that the Association of Financial Pundits and Forecasters ought to erect a monument to how wrong I have been about gold for the last couple of years. I mean, I was a skeptic at $2,500, right? 100% ago. So I don't like it as an asset class. I don't think it's been great over time. I've articulated again and again my skepticism, and I have been wrong as it is literally possible to be. So with that said, that's your health warning to everyone listening to me. I think that there are two theories here. One is that, and they can both be true. Actually, three theories. One, what this shows you is about the debasement trade, right? That the dollar is going to weaken over time, and there's going to be inflation, et cetera, et cetera. U.S. assets in particular and paper assets in general, that's bad for them. There's another theory that gold always goes up on political instability. It's not so much the inflation stuff, it's the politics. Third theory is that it's a meme stock now, and people are just piling in. All three of these can be true to different degrees. I don't like the debasement theory because we just don't see it in the bond market. People love to huff and puff about how the dollar is so weak now, but if you look at a 10-year chart, sort of average. Inflation expectations, however you measure them, any market-based measure of inflation expectations, 100% fine. So how could you have massive debasement that gold is picking up on and the bond market just doesn't see it at all? That strikes me as crazy. That leaves us with, then we go to the politics. Yeah, the world does seem a bit insecure right now. But again, why wouldn't that express itself in sovereign bond yields somewhere? Same argument. That leaves us with meme stock, which has been my favored theory. It's like people are chasing the momentum, but the longer you're wrong, the more you start to doubt yourself. And so you've caught me at a moment of self-doubt, and I'm actually writing today, trying to look again at the politics theory, the debasement theory, and see what can be salvaged there.
Yes, it is very interesting. It's like gold has turned out to be everything that Bitcoin wanted to be, and it's remarkable how Bitcoin has not performed. I mean, it's just, while they have the Bitcoin president in office, while the world appears to be going politically to shit in various ways, this is Bitcoin's year, but it isn't. It's gold's year instead.
There is a theory, by the way. I mean, I think there are people out there saying that crypto people are realizing that crypto is actually correlated to the stock market. So it's not a hedge against your other assets. And so they're switching to gold, right? They're like, there's no diversification benefit to crypto. It's just an amplifier of the returns on the rest of my portfolio. But I can't find anyone who says they see that happening, that they see
Yes.
out of crypto and into gold trades. So
yes, I would love for someone to come forward if that is really happening.
yeah,
You will
exactly.
lose all of your pride and reputation having loudly talked about why crypto is exactly the investment for this situation. But still, it would be very good for us, or at least for me as a crypto skeptic. Final thing I'd like to get your reaction to: we are the contenders for the Fed chair has been an ongoing race. Last week, I learned on Kalshi, actually, on one of these prediction markets, that there is a new contender. This guy, Rick Reeder, his chances have soared to nearly 50% after Trump had a call with him. He called him very impressive. They had a meeting at the Oval Office. He is very much in favor of cutting rates. He is a former BlackRock executive. He's expressed concerns about the labor market, etc. I haven't looked into him very much yet, but any reactions or thoughts on the possibility of not Kevin Hassett, not Kevin Walsh, but Rick Reeder as Fed chair?
I've spoken him to a lot. I've interviewed him for the newsletter. He's an extremely clever man with a very deep knowledge of markets. I mean, he's arguably the most important bond trader in the world, given the sheer amount of assets he manages at BlackRock. So he knows the market as well as anyone you can possibly imagine. And I think he's a very smart guy. Does that mean he has the temperament to be the chair of the Fed, or that Trump will pick him? I have no idea. It is important to note, however, that on several occasions, quite consistently, Reeder has said he doesn't think rates at, call them 5% now or whatever they are, or when rates were at 5%, now the base rate is a little lower, whatever. He's consistently said, actually, I don't think these highish rates are doing very much to control inflation. And in that context, he's used the example in the past of the housing market, right? Where if you brought the cost of mortgages down, houses would get cheaper. So that would actually be anti-inflationary. So he says these kinds of things, you can understand why the president would be interested in at least talking to him. He has also said on at least one occasion that maybe the Fed should, or at least suggest, I emphasize the word suggest here, he suggested that maybe the Fed should help the Treasury control interest costs. Maybe he was misconstrued. That is a left fieldy idea. I'm not sure if he really meant that or whatever, but it's out there. So I think he is a guy who might naturally appeal to the president. I mean, it's clear what the president is afraid of, right? Which is that he'll appoint somebody who will give him a lot of sweet talk in the appointment process and then turn out to be his own person or her own person, which is, of course, the whole point of the structure of the Fed chair's job. And my sense of Rick Reeder is that he's a market vet who's going to have his own views. And I wonder if Trump might not get that sense from him too and back off. He's a really serious person. Rick Reeder is not a toady.
Yeah.
He's just not.
Which is, it's very interesting because it's hard to see the right fit for the job as anyone but a toady and a sycophant. I mean, it appears that the best person would not be a seasoned Wall Street executive. It seems like the best person would just be a guy who doesn't have many thoughts and just is willing to say yes and bring things down.
With a small number of exceptions, Trump has appointed for loyalty rather than competence.
Yes.
You could argue in the case of Rubio or possibly Bessent, that's not true. But as a general rule, the main thing about getting appointed to something important in the Trump administration is saying yes. As loud as you can.
So I guess I'm hopeful for Rick Reeder based on your explanation, but I have to say the fact that he's taking the meeting and the fact that Trump really likes him for the job, it just naturally makes me skeptical. And I think that would be reasonable to most people. Rob, we'll have to have you back very soon. Thank you very much. Rob is the author of 20% of the US business, with the remaining ownership spread across primarily American investors. Oracle, Silver Lake, and Abu Dhabi-based MGX will each take 15% stakes in the company. Okay, here to help us unpack the terms of this TikTok deal, we are joined by one of the reporters who actually broke the news, Reed Albergotti, technology editor at Semaphore. Reed, thank you for joining us on Prof G Markets.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
So TikTok has closed the deal. It's official. You actually reported that this was going to close before it actually closed. I'd be interested to know how you got that scoop. But before we get there, what do we know about the deal? What are the terms? Where are we on TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's basically a joint venture, with Oracle and Silver Lake in the US. They're going to basically take over the US version of TikTok. I think the really interesting part, honestly, less than the business deal itself, is like what's going to happen with the algorithm in the US. And from what I understand, I mean, and this is something I reported on back in December, is that they're going to retrain the algorithm on US customers, and this way they'll be able to, Oracle will sort of administer this. They'll actually be able to tell if there's any manipulation from the Chinese government, essentially, on the algorithms. I thought that was sort of fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the reason this is happening is there was a national security concern that dates back many, many years. The idea was to not have China influencing the algorithm, the TikTok algorithm that millions of Americans use. Have they solved that, actually? Like, do we know that this new TikTok is free of Chinese influence?
Well, I think this is actually the big question, right? I mean, we've gone through all of this, Congress, and now this huge complicated deal, which, the US and China had to sign off on, all for, essentially for China to still kind of have a hand on this, right? Now, if you talk to people at Oracle, they say, no, I mean, they literally are going to be able to oversee this and make sure that there's no manipulation. But I've seen, there's been chatter since December when this deal, was originally sort of came out, and most of the terms came out like a month ago, from critics who think that no, actually, unless there's a complete break between China and the US version of TikTok, there's always some danger that there's going to be manipulation. Now, like the technical feasibility of that, or whether that's actually the case, I don't know. But I mean, to some extent, perception is reality, right? If people are worried about it, then I think it may continue to be a big question mark.
Just looking at the new owners, so we've got Oracle. It sounds like Oracle is really the one who's dealing with the technological side of the whole thing. Be interested to hear more about that. Also, Silver Lake, American investment firm, MGX, based out of Abu Dhabi. So that's not an American owner. I think some people would maybe say, well, why are we having non-Americans come in, these Middle Easterns come in and control the algorithm? What do you make of the ownership? Who's really in control here?
Yeah, I mean, that's another interest. I think that's going to definitely raise some questions. Now, if you've been following the Gulf region, which, Semaphore has, there have been a bunch of deals between U.S. tech companies and, MGX and G42 and other Abu Dhabi entities, UAE entities, really. So this has been what the Chinese relationship with the UAE has been this big sort of question mark around there. Should we even allow, for instance, NVIDIA chips to be shipped there? The US government now, it's sort of under Trump has been a bit more open to dealing with those entities. But I think the question is like, well, how much are they, like you said, Oracle is actually going to be administering this on the technical side. So how much is this just a monetary investment? Do they actually have any influence? I think if you talk to Oracle, they'd say no. If someone from MGX calls us up and says, can you make a little tweak to the algorithm here? It's not like they have the power to do that. But again, these are just the original ownership, right, of ByteDance owning TikTok was enough. I mean, ByteDance always claimed that they were not manipulating the algorithm as well. So I think there's just always going to be some suspicion around TikTok and the algorithm, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, this is an algorithm that has been wildly successful. I mean, just thinking back to when TikTok first came on the scene, it seemed as though there are all these potential social media companies that came and went, but no algorithm really cracked it. It was always basically Facebook that was the winner, or Instagram, whichever algorithm you were on. And then TikTok wins. It's been so successful for so long. It seems as though now it's about to change in a big way for the first time ever, which I think begs the question, like, how will it change? What will it do to the social media market? And one thing that we found kind of interesting is that on news of the deal closing, Meta stock jumped 1%. Now, maybe that's not large enough to attribute that this is because of the TikTok deal, but I'm certain that there's definitely a question that investors are asking, like, what does this actually mean for TikTok, the product? And perhaps could it be, worsening something that's already working very well? What do you think?
No, I don't think the algorithm itself is something that's a secret anymore. In other words, like, the technical aspect of it is not. I mean, everybody kind of, I think, knows how this works. There's not, there isn't at this point. I mean, look at just, frontier AI companies, right? I mean, it's hard to keep even that stuff secret. So I think everybody generally knows how this works. The thing is, what's valuable now in this, US TikTok entity is the fact that they have all this data on the users. They know what people like already. So that's why Oracle can't just come in and say, we'll just wipe this thing clean and we'll completely start over, develop, our own, because they'd basically be starting from scratch. So you'd log on to TikTok and it wouldn't know anything about what you want to watch, and they'd have to start that process over again. So I think it's, it's not the algorithm now. It's just that there's all this, institutional knowledge, I guess, and they need to find a way to retain that while also, making sure that there's no kind of undue influence, behind the scenes.
All right. Reed Albergotti, the thing you buy when things are looking really bad. It's quite telling that asset hit another record high this week. $5,000 per troy ounce, up more than 50% in the past 6 months, up more than 80% in the past 12 months. What that tells you is that investors are looking around, they're seeing what is happening, especially in America, and they're getting quite frightened. Whether that is our unsustainable fiscal deficit, which is set to explode again under Trump, or our escalating geopolitical tensions from Greenland to Venezuela to Iran, or even what is happening domestically. Most recently, armed federal agents raiding cities and shooting people in the middle of the street. All of this is working in tandem to make investors feel anxious, very anxious. And let's be real, they probably should be. We could talk about earnings and we could talk about profits, but when masked agents are on the ground shooting people in the head, suddenly the story changes a little bit. It's not about headwinds and tailwinds anymore. It becomes bigger than that. It becomes about violence. It becomes about democracy. It potentially becomes about war. And what do you do when you're worried about all of these things? What do you do when you're worried about the future of America? What do you do when you're worried about America's place in the world, perhaps a new global order? What do? You buy gold. Now, again, I'm not questioning the anxieties. Again, I think these anxieties are reasonable. However, I would question investors' conclusions. And in this case, the conclusion is that if America falls apart for whatever reason, if that happens, the answer to your problems is gold. And to that, I would ask the question, why? Why specifically? Because gold is a hard asset? Okay, well, there are lots of hard assets. Because gold is uncorrelated from the dollar? Okay, well, there are plenty of non-dollar denominated assets too. Or maybe because it is universally recognized as valuable, a store of value. Again, I could present to you a laundry list of other assets that fit the description. We could talk about many of the other metals that are more useful than gold. metals like copper and lithium and aluminum. We could talk about other commodities as well. We could talk about food, oil. We could talk about maybe even Bitcoin. We could even talk about international stocks. If you think the US is going to shit for whatever reason, well, there are 194 other nations that you could invest in, many of which have far lower debt loads than the US. Countries like Norway or Denmark or Switzerland. And if you're a real doomer, you could just invest in weapons manufacturers and defense contractors. I'm not endorsing any of these, but my point is, when times get bad, there are plenty of things you could invest in besides gold. But the market doesn't seem to be fully recognizing that. It seems that gold is rallying not because of its intrinsic value, but because of a story that investors are instinctively telling themselves. When things look bad, this is what you do. You buy gold. Everyone knows that. That is not an investment thesis. That is a story. In fact, it is often the story of a bubble. A bubble is when the price of an asset becomes so untethered from its fundamentals that it no longer reflects its actual intrinsic value in the real world. Gold is supposedly almost twice as valuable today as it was 12 months ago. But again, why? And be specific. What can it do for you that it didn't do last year? How can it improve your life relative to anything else? What makes it such a safe haven? These are the questions that investors need to ask themselves very honestly. And saying it's worth it because everyone else says it's worth it isn't an answer. You have to have your own answer. It has to be a real, genuine answer. This is what investing is about. Now, to be clear, I think gold could rally tomorrow. I think it could rally the next day. I think it could keep rallying for the rest of the year. But at a certain point, you do have to start asking questions. And in every rally like this, and in every bubble, potentially like this, the most important question is also the simplest one. And that question
in both mainland and Hong Kong stocks. And at the same time, Chinese insurers are boosting their equity holdings by nearly $90 billion in the first half of the year. And that's the strongest vote of confidence in more than 3 years. Beijing, for its part, says it wants a slow and steady rally to restore domestic confidence without triggering another bubble. And that's been a theme that I saw, at least in the last week that I was in China, talking to some of the entrepreneurs, policymakers, as well as economists. The main theme that I saw from my conversations was this idea of a slow bull run or a quiet bull run.
Alice, you're just back from China, I think. How's the jet lag? Is the vibe okay?
Well, now that I'm in my 30s, James, I'm not bouncing back like I did in my 20s. So I'm definitely feeling the jet lag, but I'm also feeling a vibe shift in China. It's been interesting on the ground since my last trip in April. Consumers, businesses, I think even the policymakers and regulators are feeling more optimistic about China.
And the stock market in China looks like it's really going, well, I don't know about gangbusters, but tell us about it, really. I'm fascinated to hear. Is it a bull market over there, or how do you see it?
Well, what was interesting, James, is that no one is talking about tariffs or trade. Everyone's talking about the stock market. For the first time, a lot of my friends are opening up their investment accounts and seeing it flashing green as opposed to red. So they're feeling like they're finally making money and not losing money. And certainly we're seeing that reflected in share prices. So even on the mainland, we've seen 30% up year to date. Notable among them are the big tech platforms that are doing extremely well. But what's been interesting to me is the fact that we're seeing margin trading return to about 2015 levels, even although that as a total size of market cap as a percentage is not as high as 2015. But it's an important metric to add because it's showing the level at which both domestic and foreign investors are applying back into Chinese stocks. And I think this is an important story about China setting up an alternative AI ecosystem, seeming to do better on the trade front, much better than people had expected back in April, and China feeling more confident about its economic plan moving forward. There's a lot of structural issues I noted, but I think the stock market has been one of the biggest examples of consumer and business confidence bouncing back.
And I just did a little bit of a back of the envelope calculation, because it turns out that the total value of the A share markets in China, that's the domestic share markets, is about 14 trillion US dollars right now. And if you look since the beginning of this year, that value has gone up by more than 2 trillion US dollars. So if you compare that to the GDP of a country like the UK, we're getting on for about half the value of the total UK economy that's gone into Chinese stocks. So, I mean, are we seeing a real shift here? Is this a whole new departure for China, do you think?
Well, I'm a little bit more skeptical about a big bull market happening. I think what struck me, when I talked to investors and even some of the regulators in Beijing is that ultimately the government wants to see a bull market, but what they call a quiet bull market or a slow bull market, meaning that they want to see more upside in equities because they think this is a good sign of China being back in business. It's also a great way to create a positive wealth effect for households that have been really squeezed by the macro slowdown and real estate bubble bursting. And then last but not least, I would say that what has become apparent is that regulators are trying to be as more pro-market and pro-business. That, I think, vibe shift happened late last year in September, and I think it's carried through to basically this year. But what's been interesting to me is, and I was talking to an investor just early today in London, is the fact that we're starting to see a big shift in the way that the Chinese market is being composed. What I mean is that traditionally, you had about as much as 90% of daily trading dominated by retail investors, not institutional. Whereas, say, in the New York Stock Exchange, that percentage is only 20 to 25% of daily trade volume dominated by retail investors. We're starting to see a shift whereby we're seeing more institutional players coming in. Insurance companies have been allowed to increase their equity exposure to as much as 30% of total assets. And even everyday Chinese people now, I think, more savvy about investing. Instead of investing in single stocks as they did in the past, they're investing through ETFs on financial platforms offered by, say, Alipay. So we're starting to see, I think, a more intelligent, educated, I would say, capital market system. It's still a long way away from Europe and America, but I think certainly that has been a big shift, and I'm probably not covered well enough in the media.
I remember some of these bull runs in the past. I was in China in 2007 and 2015 for the bull runs, and those did get pretty crazy. I remember almost every taxi you got into, the driver was either asking you for a stock tip or giving you a stock tip. And there was a strange spectacle in 2015 of the People's Daily, which is the very staid newspaper that acts as the mouthpiece of the Communist Party of China, urging people to do the most capitalist thing imaginable and buy stocks. I remember in April 2015, the People's Daily declared that 4,000 points is just the beginning, and the market did actually go on to exceed 6,000 points that year. So there are a lot of crazy things happening. I wonder what it's like now. Just one more remembrance from them. I remember covering as a reporter an investor who, for the Valentine's Day of 2015, gave his wife 99 stocks as presents, and that's because the Chinese, for 99 sounds like for a long time or for eternity. I don't know whether his love lasted that long, but sadly the stock market bubble didn't last that long. Just 4 months later, it crashed. So, Alice, what do you think? I mean, I'm not going to ask you to look into your crystal ball, but do you think this stock market rally is based has more solid foundations?
Well, I think given how cheap the forward PE ratios are and valuations still are by historical and comparative standards, when you say look at the US market, I think that the bull run has a bit more to go. I do caution, and this is where I think, it's worth putting our China hats on. I do caution against a massive bull run because I think ultimately the government prioritizes control and stability. So if they see that we're going north of 5,000 in the next few months, things seem to be going out of hand on the upwards, I could foresee potential intervention through some of the state-owned players to try to cool the market down a little bit. But certainly, I think in the next few months, we'll see more positive stories coming out of China, potentially with the new 5-year plan, which I think will prioritize AI revolution, and potentially a Xi-Trump summit at the end of October in Korea as well. But again, I do not think that we're going to see a massive bull run. I think that ultimately, back to the top of the call, I think ultimately they want to see a slow bull run or a quiet bull run, which came up in many of my conversations in Beijing this past week.
And are the foreign investors getting really excited now?
I think that we saw the nadir late last year, before the September pivot by the PBOC. On the margin, we're starting to see hedge funds get back in. We're starting to see even pension funds that have been reluctant for China, exposed reasons to get back into China. I think COVID was a bad time for China, and certainly after that, it was difficult for many of these endowments and pension funds to justify to their boards increased China exposure. I start to see that the rhetoric is starting to shift because there is more upward momentum, and because ultimately, they feel as though China is going to be the main competitor with the US in this broader technological AI-driven race. And so if you look at the Mag 7, valuations seem very stretched. Why not get some exposure to China and hedge some of that overexposure to the US? So I think on the margin to your question, James, is we're starting to see more interest. I don't think we're going back to 2015, pre-COVID levels of interest anytime soon, but certainly marginally we're seeing more interest.
Am I wrong to be picking on this aspect of it, Alice? I mean, when I looked at the most popular sectors for Chinese investors in their stock market, it seemed to me that these sectors are almost exclusively the very same as the US has been targeting to prevent China's progress in. In other words, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and some others like that. Am I being too simplistic about this?
No, I think, James, you've definitely hit the nail on the head in some respect, because what has happened since Trump 1.0 is that China, through its state apparatus, but also through bottom-up initiatives, has plowed trillions of dollars in the case of semiconductors of fixed asset investment to try to build a resilient China supply chain. Because it has seen since Trump 1.0 that, the US can easily cut off certain choke point industries like semiconductors and AI. So I think given the investment in those areas, as well as I would say a preferencing amongst some of these companies for China alternatives, I think that ultimately these sectors have seen a lot of upside and growth, and I think that will remain the case. I think it was interesting that Alibaba was announcing, as well as other tech companies announcing that they are sourcing their own chips. I think it's also interesting that there's been more focus on not going fully into NVIDIA's H20 chips and trying to cultivate and opt for Chinese alternatives. I think this is all part of a broader strategy, which is to say, create an ecosystem which is a China-driven ecosystem for these technologies. And again, it was sparked by Trump 1.0. I think in addition to what you said, James, another region that hasn't gotten that much attention yet, I think, is biotech, where there has been massive upswings in valuations as well.
Fascinating.
Okay, let's take a quick break.